Welcome aboard to Ironside Sheets. An hour later, all three of Mr. Klein's wares up for auction were sold. He set the money into his vault after Miss Porter counted and recorded his profits. Mr. Klein coughed. The buyers brought in an Egyptian ocean's worth of sand into his office. He coughed again, frustrated, but also pleased. Three creatures that neither he nor the rest of the human populace could stand were sent to live out their days suffering at the hands of others. It was a twisted sense of justice. Miss Porter made sure he understood that, but he could hardly care less. Even if what he did was wrong, even by the standards of his profession, there was one thing he prided himself in that he believed balanced the equation. One of his wares stepped into his office. "You wanted to see me, sir?" Mr. Klein got to his feet. "Miss Porter, can you finish this off?" "Yes, sir." Mr. Klein grabbed a small burlap sack off the sand-washed floor. The fine particles flew into the air, sending both he and Miss Porter into a coughing fit. When the air settled enough for him to concentrate, Mr. Klein threw the bag at his ware. "Open it." The ware investigated the bag's contents and looked back up. Greed and confusion mixed in his countenance. "I don't understand, sir." He dug around in the bag again. "Are you sure this is the right bag?" Mr. Klein lit a candle on his desk and grabbed a small pack of papers from one of his drawers. He held up the back towards his ware. "Do you know what this is?" "No, sir. I couldn't tell you." "This is your contract. These papers label you as a ware, a material thing, not human and beneath cattle. So long as these exist, you are nothing more than something to be bought and sold." He dipped the corner of the pack into the candle's flame. "I'm free?" Mr. Klein dropped the papers into his metal trash bin. "You are human again. The bag there is your fresh start. It isn't much, but it can get you on your feet." The man looked around, still unsure if the whole act was some trick for Mr. Klein's amusement. He tested his theory, backing away towards the door. "Not quite." The man smirked. Here came the catch, one that would make his life a living hell outside the confines of the work camp. "You leave tonight when everyone sleeps. I don't want the others to believe they have the right to escape. You will remain in my office until nightfall. Then you may go." The man took a step into the sand. Cheap civilian clothes covered his back and his money sack lay slung over his shoulder. Mr. Klein watched him go. He wasn't satisfied the man hadn't any ideas to free the rest of his wares until he faded into the horizon line. "Mr. Klein, are you sure that was a good idea?" "Last night, the two men I roughed up for being lazy decided to take justice into their own hands, collecting one of my best wares and manhandling her as if to defile her." "You said her. Are you going soft, Mr. Klein?" Mr. Klein whirled around, only stopping in time so his knuckles just touched Miss Porter's chin. She grinned and stifled a laughing fit. "I suppose you haven't. Now, I repeat, are you sure that was a good idea?" "My wares come into my possession because they do not deserve to be considered human, for any number of reasons. But some of my wares don't come to me by any direct actions on their behalf. Some of them, though few and far between, have good hearts. They come across hard times and they make deals with the wrong people. The envoy or the harbingers both have bad apples among them. They make deals with the wrong people and they find that they can't pay their debt. To make up for that debt, they're sold to me. Through either poor decision-making skills or just unavoidable hardship or a combination of the two, they lose their right to be called human. So you have yet to tell me your story, Miss Porter. Feel like opening up tonight?" Miss Porter stiffened up, standing as rigid as a board. Not tonight, Mr. Klein. Insofar, I'd rather die than relive the reason. She took a step back toward Mr. Klein's office. Miss Porter, what's your first name? She paused, and though not visible from this angle, he sensed her smile. What's yours? Fair enough. Have a good night, Miss Porter. The same to you, Mr. Klein. She waved her hand behind her. The sun beat down, turning the sand into a searing blanket of dust, scratching eyes and scorching skin. The wares were ordered to remain in their living quarters while hired hands, bundled up in long sleeves and thick pants, cinched down at the ends, face masks and goggles. Cargo, machine parts, goods, soaps, all afront. The real money lay cooped up in their poor shacks they called home. Mr. Klein looked over three new wares. He was impressed. Behind his stoic expression bubbled an interest. How could these three beautiful creatures end up in his care? He pushed the interest down, bottled it, and sent it into an internal void. A glint outside the window adjacent to the front door caught his attention. He grabbed a pen from a small cup on the edge of his desk. Heavy and metallic, he slowly rolled the pen over his fingers. Mr. Klein finalized the deal and asked the seller to sign a contract. He bent over Mr. Klein's desk to write his signature when the front door burst open. Mr. Klein glanced up to lay eyes on the intruder. The intruder, dusty from the sand, reached into his coat pocket. Dusty pulled a pistol from his jacket, and Mr. Klein hurled his pen, aiming for his shoulder. As he aimed at Mr. Klein, the pen lodged itself between his knuckles, skewing his aim. He yelled out and pulled the trigger. The seller gripped his shoulders as the bullet grazed him, tearing open his shirt and embedding itself into the wall behind Mr. Klein, several inches to the left of his head. Dusty clutched his pierced hand, trying in vain to staunch the bleeding. He turned back and forth, grasping for control of his pain. The revolver lay on the floor. Mr. Klein stood and walked over to the gun. He picked it up, took aim, and fired, taking out Dusty's knee. The intruder collapsed, shifting between clutching his knee and hand. The seller lay on the floor, shaking and cowering. Miss Porter stood at the back of the room, her shoulder blades gently pressed against the wall. She looked over to the bullet hole in the wall and sighed. Mr. Klein gripped the intruder's lapels and dragged him into the southern end of his town. He set the gallows ropes in place and pulled his ward up on the stage. No one saw Mr. Klein wrap the rope around the would-be assassin's neck, nor did anyone see him pull the rope, hauling the man into the air. The gunshot made it clear to the town residents that they were to remain indoors until Mr. Klein told them otherwise. So when the man flailed his legs as the rope dug into his neck and cut off his airway, no one saw him. There were no sympathizers to be had. Miss Porter stayed in Mr. Klein's office. She was aware of the justice her boss was serving, but she considered the gallows to be an outdated and cruel form of punishment. She detested the act of hanging an individual and subsequently avoided the gallows. The man kicked his legs out one more time before going slack. Mr. Klein breathed a sigh of relief as the hanged man let out his final breath.